Why is it that, even knowing what needs to be done, you keep sabotaging yourself? And what if your lack of discipline isn't a flaw, but a disguised cry for help? We live surrounded by promises of productivity, success formulas, unbeatable routines. But hardly anyone talks about what really matters, what you feel before you try to act. The truth is that there's no indiscipline where there is emotional clarity. What exists most often is unresolved pain, fear disguised as tiredness, and escape masked as distraction. This video won't teach you how to become an efficient machine. It will invite you to something much braver, to listen to yourself. To understand why you get lost in your own plans, why consistency slips away, why guilt builds up. Because the discipline you seek isn't about doing more. It's about feeling better. It's curious how, deep down, no one consciously chooses indiscipline. What many call lack of willpower is actually a silent attempt at protection. The mind, faced with unresolved pains, learns to create escapes disguised as laziness, procrastination, and postponement. We aren't failing to act, we are trying to avoid feeling. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "That which is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil." And so, many escapes are born from the attempt to preserve what still hurts too much to face. When we look at procrastination with more attentive eyes, we realize it's not the cause but the symptom of something deeper. Like a fever signaling an infection, the delay in acting reveals hidden emotional wounds. That's why fighting only the behavior without understanding the pain is like silencing the alarm and ignoring the fire. Procrastination is a soul's cry for nurturing, not a sign of personal weakness. We try to extinguish emotional fires with leaky buckets of self-judgment. What we so often call laziness may, deep down, be accumulated emotional exhaustion. Living in a constant state of internal vigilance drains our strength, as if we were swimming against an invisible current. Exhaustion is not just physical, it's the fatigue of carrying guilt, expectations, and unprocessed wounds. A tired mind is not slow, it's prudent, trying to survive where it once felt threatened. Instead of blaming ourselves, we should ask, what exactly am I protecting myself from? If we could see indiscipline as a request for care rather than proof of incapacity, maybe life would become lighter. Escape would no longer be seen as an error but as a map. A map that points to where it hurts, where kindness is missing, where we still need to look with more love. Deep down, no one wants to sabotage their own happiness. But sometimes the fear of pain makes it seem safer not to try. Understanding this is the first step to rebuilding from the inside what seems to be collapsing outside. Organizing life seems simple until we confront the internal battle we fight daily. Sometimes it's not the lack of tools, methods, or discipline. It's the invisible conflict between what we want to build and what we fear to face. The silent internal chaos sabotages any attempt at external planning. While the mind screams in disorder, no spreadsheet, agenda, or strategy can stand. And it's in this unresolved tension that many dreams end up getting lost. The mess around us is often just the visible reflection of the confusion we avoid looking at inside. It's no coincidence that messy rooms, missed deadlines, and accumulated tasks accompany moments of anxiety, guilt, and extreme self-demand. The physical environment becomes an emotional extension, as if the outer world merely expresses what we deny feeling. In this context, every attempt to put life in order, without healing the mind, is like sweeping leaves during a storm. At war with yourself, any to-do list becomes a trench. The simple act of starting becomes an internal battle between parts that want to move forward and parts that only seek protection. Freud pointed out that the mind is like an iceberg, floating with only a small part visible above the water. True disorganization lies in the depths, in what we think we've overcome but that still silently operates our behaviors and blocks. If the mind is the battlefield, real organization begins with internal reconciliation. It's necessary to listen to yourself, identify hidden fears, welcome the pain instead of forcing it into silence. Only then will external planning stop being a house of cards. Organizing life, after all, is less about techniques and more about courage. The courage to stop fighting yourself, to accept the mess that exists, and from there to build a new order, more genuine, more human, more free. Most advice on discipline revolves around habits, routines, and productivity. But there's something fundamental that's rarely said. The root of discipline is not behavior, it's emotion. Before any action there is a feeling. And if that feeling is loaded with fear, anger, or self-punishment, the doing becomes unsustainable. Discipline that ignores what one feels is fragile, like a poorly built bridge on unstable ground. Forcing habits without understanding the emotions that sustain them is the shortest path to frustration. It's not that the person doesn't want to change, it's that they are trying to build a new house without clearing the rubble of the old one. And each failed attempt becomes another layer of guilt. The mind, already overwhelmed, associates discipline with pain, creating automatic resistance at the slightest sign of trying. What should liberate ends up imprisoning even more. That's why many people repeat sabotages even knowing exactly what they should do. The problem was never lack of knowledge. Everyone knows it's important to sleep well, eat better, study consistently. The challenge is emotional, dealing with the fear of failure, the feeling of unworthiness, or the traumas associated with pressure. The repetition of mistakes in this context is not ignorance, it's self-protection. And sometimes protecting yourself means destroying bridges before even crossing them. When we understand that feeling comes before doing, everything changes. Discipline stops being a forced effort and becomes an internal movement of alignment. Acting becomes a natural consequence of a well-tended emotion. Therefore, more than a planner or a productivity technique, perhaps what we really need is a little listening. Listening to what inside us is still afraid, what is tired, what needs to be seen. Because every true change is born from an honest encounter with what we feel, not from denying it. At some point in life, all of us learn to escape. Not out of weakness, but out of necessity. When pain becomes too big to be felt, the brain does what it knows best. Creates escape routes. And these routes, disguised as everyday distractions, eventually become the new normal. The phone, food, overwork. They are not addictions at first, they are refuges. And the more we avoid the pain, the more it silently commands us. Each distraction is a sophisticated escape, a well-disguised emotional hiding place. The problem is that the more we run, the more lost we become within ourselves. We become experts at avoiding but illiterate at feeling. And what is not felt insists on returning. Jung wrote, "What you resist, persists." And so, without realizing it, our life becomes a choreography of escape, jumping from pleasure to pleasure but never truly finding ourselves. The mind, by not wanting to feel what it needs to, creates shortcuts. It protects us from pain but also distances us from growth. These shortcuts, like procrastination, rationalizing, or acting on autopilot, are attempts at emotional survival. But living in escape mode has a cost: deep disconnection from who we really are. The pain that is not faced infiltrates decisions, relationships, and silences. And the cruelest part is that, after so much running, we even forget what we were trying to avoid. Resolving pain is not about eliminating it, but about allowing it to say what it needs to say. When we stop running and listen to the message behind the discomfort, something transforms. Pain, which was once a prison, becomes a guide. It points to unmet needs, violated boundaries, silenced truths. And it's at this exact point, where escape meets courage, that we begin to find ourselves. Because running from yourself is too exhausting, and living in peace, deep down, is coming home. We are surrounded by goals, checklists, resolutions. But few ask themselves, what's all this for? The rush for productivity sometimes hides a void that no external achievement can fill. And the busier we get, the further we move from peace. Being busy is not the same as being at peace, and often the excess of tasks is just an attempt to avoid silence. Because in silence, we hear what we've been avoiding. Having goals without clarity is like rowing forcefully in a boat without a rudder. The effort is there, but the direction is random. It's not uncommon to see disciplined but unhappy people, productive but disconnected from themselves. The problem is not discipline itself, but the absence of meaning. When we don't know the why behind our actions, any obstacle feels like a burden, not a step. Clarity doesn't speed up the journey, but it illuminates it. And that changes everything. True discipline is not born from accumulated goals, but from understood purposes. Knowing what you want to do is important, but knowing why it matters is what sustains you on difficult days. Those who have clarity endure boredom, pain, and effort, because they understand the direction. It's the difference between obeying a plan and honoring a purpose. And purpose, unlike a goal, has no end. It renews, matures, accompanies growth. Seeking clarity is an act of courage. It requires stopping, silencing the rush, and facing the questions that unsettle. What am I trying to escape with so many goals? What really moves me? Because it's useless to have 1,000 objectives if none of them speaks to your truth. Sometimes, life changes not when you do more, but when you better understand what you are doing. Goals are useful. But without clarity, they are just another way to get lost. The need to control everything around often comes from fear. Fear of failing, of being judged, of feeling an old pain again. And so, in the name of safety, we try to plan every detail, predict every scenario, control every variable. But the paradox is cruel. The more we try to control the external world, the more disconnected we become from our internal world. Excessive control is, in fact, the absence of trust in oneself, in life, in the natural flow of things. Perfectionism in this context acts as a silent saboteur. It disguises itself as excellence but carries rigidity, anxiety, and paralysis. It's the attempt to be flawless to avoid any criticism or failure. But being human is, by definition, being imperfect. When discipline is confused with perfection, it ceases to be an ally and becomes an executioner. Deep down, perfectionism doesn't seek growth, it seeks acceptance. And that imprisons us in a subtle emotional trap. Here arises a transformative idea. Discipline is not rigidity. It's lightness with direction. True discipline is flexible, human, compassionate. It understands that consistency is not built with suffocating self-demand but with gentle commitment. Being disciplined is not about being trapped by unbreakable rules, it's knowing how to return to the path even after slipping. It's trusting the destination so much that you don't despair over detours. When we let go of control, we find our center again. We stop getting lost in details and return to inhabit our own essence. This doesn't mean living without structure, but living with balance. Real control isn't dominating everything, but maintaining integrity even when everything escapes. Because what truly sustains us is not mastering external variables, but the serenity of knowing our own compass. And that compass only works when we stop fighting the wind. We live in an age where dopamine has become currency. Likes, notifications, immediate rewards, everything seems designed to keep us in a constant state of quick pleasure. But true discipline is born exactly where that pleasure ends. Continuing without the sparkle of motivation, without instant applause, without immediate relief. That is emotional maturity. It's knowing that value lies in the process, not just in the reward. And that the journey demands more constancy than enthusiasm. Abandoning easy dopamine is an exercise in presence. Training the brain not to depend on motivation involves re-educating the body, habits, and especially expectations. Because motivation fluctuates, disappears, deceives. Commitment, however, is silent and stable. It doesn't shout, but it sustains. It's the difference between those who act when they feel like it and those who act because they know what needs to be done. Discipline, in this context, becomes a pact with the future, even when the present is uncomfortable. This transition hurts. The brain, conditioned to seek immediate pleasure, resists. Boredom comes, tiredness, the desire to quit. And it's at this exact point that many confuse discomfort with failure. But it's not failure, it's evolution. Because true growth doesn't happen on the stage of euphoria, but in the backstage of persistence. It's the silent training of those who keep going even without an audience. Those who know that pleasure may not come now but meaning always will. Emotional maturity, then, reveals itself in the ability to continue without pleasure. Not through rigidity but through clarity. It's when you realize that discipline isn't forcing yourself but sustaining yourself. That it's not about doing everything with constant joy, but with constant purpose. And that purpose, when real, guides you even on gray days. Because those who only walk under the sun never learn to dance in the rain. And life, almost always, demands muddy steps before blooming. There's a subtle trap in the idea of strength. Believing that being strong means never failing, never stopping, never showing fragility. But that's not strength, it's rigidity. And what doesn't bend, breaks. True strength lies in honesty with what we feel, even when it dismantles the image we try to uphold. Because ignoring your own pain in the name of productivity is like trying to run with a sprained ankle. You might go far, but the bill will come. Destructive self-demand often disguises itself as productivity. We accomplish tasks, meet goals, maintain control, but inside, something bleeds. There's no merit in annulling yourself to meet external or internal unrealistic expectations. When productivity becomes a way to punish yourself for not being enough, it ceases to be healthy. And the body, the mind, the heart eventually scream. Through tiredness, anxiety, and loss of meaning. Allowing yourself to fail without abandoning the path is one of the most mature forms of persistence. Because failure is inevitable. But blaming yourself for it is optional. What sustains a journey isn't perfection, but constant reconciliation with oneself. It's understanding that mistakes don't disqualify the path, they make it more human. When failure becomes learning, it ceases to be an enemy and becomes an ally. Being honest with yourself means recognizing limits, accepting pauses, asking for help. It's knowing that vulnerability doesn't diminish anyone, on the contrary, it expands consciousness. And consciousness indeed is genuine strength. Because only those who allow themselves to be real are capable of building something lasting. The discipline that is born from this honesty is gentler, wiser, and interestingly more stable. Because it doesn't feed on the mask of strength but on the truth of being. As long as the focus is on proving something to others, constancy will be unstable. Because the gaze of others is volatile, and trying to meet external expectations is an endless and exhausting game. The ego wants quick results, immediate applause, constant validation. The soul, however, moves at a different pace. It has no rush, it needs a process. True constancy begins when we stop running for approval and start walking for meaning. Acting out of love for what you are building and not out of fear of failing changes everything. It changes the rhythm, the intention, the way we deal with stumbles. When action comes from within, motivation is less noisy but much deeper. And the most interesting thing, when we stop trying to prove, we actually start to build. Not out of imposition but out of meaning. Not out of obligation but out of identity. Action ceases to be a burden and becomes an extension of who we are. This change requires courage. Because letting go of the gaze of others often means facing the emptiness of not knowing who you are without the audience. But it's precisely in that emptiness that clarity appears. Constancy reveals itself when you act even when no one is watching. When what you do speaks to your truth, not to the feed of comparisons. And that creates roots. Because what is done with purpose remains even when the applause fades. More than consistency in results, we need consistency of intention. The soul demands slow processes that respect cycles, that embrace doubt. Because building is not always beautiful, fast, or visible. But when it's true, it sustains. And on this more internal, more intimate path, is born a constancy that doesn't depend on the world, only on your connection to what truly matters. And that, no one can take away. There's a moment when pain ceases to be just suffering and becomes a compass. Not because it disappears, but because it is finally heard. When we channel suffering as fuel, something profound happens. Discipline ceases to be a battle against oneself and becomes a path of reconciliation. Pain then no longer paralyzes. It guides. Because every wound silently carries a call for change. It's not about strength. It's about truth. Strength can tire, break, harden. But truth liberates, guides, sustains. When you act from what you truly feel, not from what you should feel, discipline gains another nature. It becomes a response, not an imposition. Action aligns with being. And the energy that was once spent trying to silence pain becomes power to build something meaningful. Transforming pain into direction requires presence. Courage to feel without drowning, to look without fleeing, to learn from what seemed only darkness. And that's where many find themselves. In the midst of the fall, they discover firmness. Because pain doesn't destroy us. What destroys is denying pain, silencing pain, ignoring what it wants to show us. When it's embraced, it shows the way, what needs to change, what needs to heal, what needs to bloom. Discipline in this context is no longer blind sacrifice. It's conscious choice. It's walking with pain on your shoulders but eyes on the horizon. It's stopping fighting life and starting to dance with it even when the music seems sad. Because as long as we try to be indestructible, we'll keep breaking inside. But when we decide to be truthful, we find a strength that doesn't shout but that remains. And that changes everything. Maybe your greatest breakthrough won't come from a new planner but from a new look at yourself. It's not about defeating yourself, it's about stopping running away. True discipline doesn't come from pressure, but from reconnection. When you understand that your disorganization carries stories, that your procrastination has reasons, that your strength lies in honesty and not perfection, everything changes. And that change begins in silence, deep within, when you choose to feel instead of just doing. Of everything you heard here, what touched you the most? Share it in the comments. This exchange might help you and a lot of people who are also on this journey. If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.